Thank you so much to the Mississippi University for Women for having me, to the University Press of Mississippi for publishing my book, and to our moderator. I'm very honored to be here among so many talented writers, and it's just a joy to talk about my book, Right to Revolt, and especially in this year when I know the university is commemorating the 50-year anniversary of the segregation of the university with those Who Dared project, and the year that the symposium theme is Overcoming Silence, Speak Out When It Warrants No Stir, from Eudora Welty's The Demonstrators, because that's really at the heart of my book, Right to Revolt. It is about demonstrators, about what I call freedom fighters, who indeed dare to break the silence, who indeed dare to speak out, and who caused a great stir, and dare to exercise their right to revolt, which is why I call both that, because it is their right to revolt in a society that wasn't honoring them as equals and wasn't allowing America to live up to its creed of equal justice for all people and equal freedom for all people. So my book, he explained that quite well, so that kind of cuts off a lot of stuff I need to talk about, so thank you very much. I wanted to start by reading right at the beginning of the prologue about a struggle. I kind of start my book about a story that's in the middle and then go back in time. So I'll start with the prologue. Roots of Revolt. Near 2:30 a.m. on January 10, 1966, Klansmen aimed their shotguns at a burning farmhouse in Forest County, Mississippi, and fired repeatedly. They intended to kill the black family with fire or bullets. It made no difference to them, as long as they silenced the troublemaking Vernon Damer. Inside the burning home, Damer slid his shotgun out of the partially open front door and returned fire. His wife Ellie rushed her 10-year-old daughter Betty toward the only way out, a window at the back of the house. But it was jammed shut. The fire roared down the hallway toward them. Betty saw no signs of her brothers, whose bedrooms were at the other end of the ranch-style house. "We're not going to make it out of here," she sobbed. Flames lit the ceiling and dripped onto her arms. Her father inhaled green embers. Her mother yanked at the window. Screams pierced the raging fire outside and startled the youngest Klansman. He looked at his leader in horror. The dark-haired creature fixed his sharp blue eyes on them and said, "Ah, hell, let him die. That's what he came for." Hours later, in the headquarters of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan in adjacent Jones County, Imperial Wizard Sam Bowers, who had ordered the attack, promised his men that even if arrested, Mississippi jurors would not dare convict them. But Bowers failed to realize that he had made a grave error. Damer, a beloved local civil rights leader, had worked closely with the Department of Justice officials on voter discrimination for over a decade. This attack was personal to them. Special Agent in charge of Mississippi, Roy Moore, moved the core of the FBI's war against the Klan into Forest and Jones counties. He selected an ideal place from which to launch a major offensive because Jones County was the command center of the Invisible Empire, and Forest County was the home of one of the most powerful civil rights movements. Jones and Forest counties, they're located in the southeastern quadrant of the state, and I refer to them jointly as the Central Piney Woods because geographically they're at that center, and actually economically and commercially also became the center of South Mississippi. But most important to me, that became the nucleus of the civil rights conflicts and the racial conflicts actually long before what we traditionally think of as the civil rights movement in South Mississippi. And very little had been written about that whole area. There's so much written about Mississippi in general, but that area had been sort of overlooked. And it had been, this myth of moderation had developed actually because of the Damer case. The Klansmen that came that night came from neighboring Jones County, and when they prosecuted the case, the prosecutors tried to make it seem like there was no Klan in Forest County, there was no Klan violence there, that the invasion came from Jones County, and but that wasn't exactly completely true, because a lot of the conspirators who planned the killing, in fact, there was a Klansman in Forest County, and that Klansman had asked for the murder of Damer. But Forest County had had a long history of trying to hide, trying to pretend to create a facade that they were this bastion of moderation in a state that was once notorious for its racial extremism. And they were pretty successful at doing that, and particularly they did, now I will say a lot of the local leaders were horrified by the attack on Damer. Some of them did know him personally and were morally outraged. But many of them were also pragmatic segregationists, and they realized if you had these violent, intense, acts that got media attention, and that brought in the federal government, and they wanted to avoid that at all costs. So that's also one of the reasons that they worked really hard to prosecute this case. So this myth, though, that had developed long over time, also tried to create, make it sound like Jones and Forest counties that were right next to each other, grew up in isolation of each other. They really did not. As I argue in the book, that behind this facade lies a dark racial history linking Jones and Forest counties in violent trajectories that routinely parallel each other and often intersected in brutal paths towards wretched ends. And during the turn of the century, actually, Forest County had a worse reputation for violence than Jones County. One paper said it was the hub of black lynchings. And so as I began to research the story, at first I really thought I was just going to focus on the Damer case. But as I got deep into the research, and even though very little was written about it in books, I was so fortunate that there was actually copious resources. I mean, for example, there was 40,000 pages of an FBI file that was unredacted, and that's sort of unheard of, right? Usually get FBI files and everything that's important is blacked out. But I had this, and then I started, reaching back to find out, is this something different, or is this, something that was an operation in this county, or was this representative of the county? And as I started to trace the history back, I started to realize that there were so many other cases. So my story became much larger than Vernon Damer. It became about all the way back to settlement, all the different, freedom fighters that dared to speak out, that became demonstrators, that tried to change this county. And so the first part of the book really focuses on that, the early part. Damer traces his roots back to a plantation owner. There was slavery there. His ancestor was a plantation owner, John Kelly, who had an affair with his slave, Sarah, and from that came the Damer family. John Kelly did free his children, his slave children, during the Civil War, and they were able to then get land through homesteading acts in Forest County in a place called the Kelly Settlement. And there was some modern elements in Forest County and progressive elements, absolutely. And that's actually why, because of that, and because of this great black entrepreneurship and black capitalism, you did see a real creation of a black bourgeois and a black proletariat, sturdy black proletariat in the area. And so the first part of the book looks at a lot of that, and it looks at similar things that were happening in Jones County, and it looks at the onslaught of Jim Crow and how African Americans responded to that there. The second part of the book focuses on massive resistance and the civil rights movement, and I want to do my second reading from there. Vernon Damer is incredibly important in this part, as is another resident of the Kelly Settlement, Clyde Kennard. Clyde Kennard, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about him was because since you were celebrating this commemoration of the anniversary of desegregation, Clyde Kennard was one of the first people to try to desegregate higher education in Mississippi, but very few people know his story. Mostly we focus on James Meredith and Ole Miss. But Clyde Kennard in 1955, 1 year after Brown versus Board of Education said segregation in education is unconstitutional. But of course, Mississippi responded with massive resistance, and the Supreme Court has no army, as President Jackson long ago had said. So unless people are willing to enforce law, it doesn't happen. So you had to have brave people like Clyde Kennard. And in 1955, he applied to what is now University of Southern Mississippi, but it was then Mississippi Southern College. He caused quite a stir. The white patriarchs, the city leaders, all sort of came together with state leaders. There was a sovereignty commission there that was developed with massive resistance. It acted like an intelligence agency, basically, and it collected information on any kind of civil rights protests or acts or plans that were going on. Citizens councils developed in which this was mostly middle class or elite whites that tried to use all kinds of economic intimidation. And also there are some arguments now that they also gave information to the Klan. which then allowed violence to occur. And so, of course, you had then the Klan develop. And then you just had people that were willing to go out and kill people that weren't in the Klan, right? That were offended by people that were protesting in some way and trying to change the Southern way of life, so to speak. Clyde Kennard, he had grown up, I said, in the Kelly settlement, and then he went into the military as an adult and used the GI Bill to go to the University of Chicago. But in his third year, his stepfather had fallen ill, and always the dutiful son, he came home to help his mother with the poultry plant. But he had a brilliant mind, and he really wanted to finish his education. But of course, the closest school that he could go to was hours away. There was no way he could run the poultry farm and commute. And so to him, it was simply logical that he applied to Mississippi Southern College. But it was also to push things a step forward. He joined the NAACP that Vernon Dahmer and other people had founded in Forest County at the end of World War II. He helped create a NAACP youth group, and then he sent an application into Mississippi Southern College. And this reading right here is sort of the response of the powers that be. The angry white men gathered. One man suggested that he could make it look like a railroad accident. The Negro tried to run the tracks, but the train came too fast. Another convinced the rest they should frame the Negro for a felony and send him to prison instead. Perhaps he opposed murder, or maybe he worried that the killing would attract federal attention. Going to prison for conspiring to kill someone did not appeal to them. Still, they had worked hard to turn the normal school into Mississippi Southern College, a respectable institution that attracted commercial wealth to Hattiesburg. They would not watch it collapse because some colored boy wanted an education. Besides, they had warned him. He knew the dangers, but he refused to capitulate. The white men had no understanding of Clyde Kennard. To them, he was just another troublemaking Negro, a heretic to the racial order, whom they wanted to put down, but settled for putting away. Among blacks, Kennard was a hero. A 20th century black philosopher who fought the ignorance of white supremacy with the reason of the black liberation movement. They respected him, but they feared him too. No black person had dared seek admission to the MSC before 1955 when Kennard requested an application. To Kennard's, segregation was as illogical as it was evil. MSC was a state-sponsored college. His tax dollars funded it. When a friend warned him that whites might kill him, he replied, "History is in the making. It's an interesting time to live, and not such a bad time to die." He did not know yet the suffering they would cause him before they allowed him to die. When he applied, they at first tried to use nonviolent tactics to force him to rescind his application. They tried to reason with him. They tried to offer to pay for him to go to one of the black colleges in the state. And when he reasoned with them back, and he really did believe he could reason with them. They said, fine, apply, but you need 5 recommendations from alumni. Of course, all alumni are white, and was giving them a recommendation. So he stepped back for a while, focused with Vernon Dahmer on voter registration, and Vernon Dahmer also became a plaintiff in one of the most important voting rights cases in the entire United States, called U.S. versus Theron Lind. Theron Lind was the registrar there, and he liked to boast that he had never, ever once registered a black person. He did actually register one person who identified as black. She was a mixed race, and he mistakenly put white. He thought she was white and put white down on her application. But that was the only person he registered. So that case, the Department of Justice took that case on, and actually the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals found that Lind was in violation and ordered him to immediately start registering black applicants. But he appealed. And then he said, while I'm appealing, I have to register black applicants. So the struggle goes on for a decade, right? And so, Kennard helped some with that, and then in 1958, he returned to his efforts to try to desegregate the college. But of course, obviously this is incredibly difficult. There's people plotting against him. I should also mention, though, that there were some moderate elements in Hattiesburg. Fealty to white supremacy was pervasive, but not absolute. Every region of the state had white progressives. who opposed Jim Crow, white moderates who supported segregation, but they opposed violence. You had many newspapers like Hattie Potter and Greenville, who was opposing segregation. In Central Piney Woods, both the Hattiesburg American and the Laurel Lido called definitely segregation issues. They definitely supported segregation. But they did oppose violence, and they would criticize it in the papers. And they also sometimes would actually post letters to the editor written by racial progressives. So that became important. And there was also a really important white progressive in Hattiesburg by the name of Pete East, and he had his own newspaper called the Pedal Paper, and he became evolved into a really fierce critic of segregation. So I just wanted to read you a little piece of something he wrote right after, in November of '55, actually, Mississippi had passed a state amendment saying that they could close schools rather than integrate. And he just thought that was insane. And so in his Pedal Paper, he attempted to appeal to the Bible Belt conscience of his readers, and he contemplated the racial arrangement of heaven. And he asked this: do they have another heaven for the Negro, or possibly just a section of heaven set aside for the Negro quarters? Are the streets in the Negro quarters paved with gold too? Do they give him milk and honey, or does he stay too busy mopping the gold streets that run in front of the white area? Perhaps, he said, God forbade segregation in heaven. In that case, he warned his fellow citizens, it's likely to be thumbs down just when you tell St. Peter we're from Mississippi. And he did a lot of, used satire and used humor a lot to try to get people to see this immorality, right? One of my favorites was he wrote to the newspaper like, all the good things the Citizens Council has done for Mississippi. And then there's completely blank page. And he was a great supporter of Clyde Kennard. And the Hattiesburg American actually published a letter that Kennard wrote about segregation, criticizing segregation. Kennard revealed the impossibility of achieving a separate but equal society. And he asked in his letter, after blacks and whites completed their separate education, where do our parallel worlds of separate but equal go? Are we to assume that parallel hospitals are to be built for two groups of doctors? Are we to build two bridges across the same stream in order to give people opportunities to both groups of engineers? Are we to have two courts of law as to give both groups of lawyers the same chance to demonstrate their skills? Two legislatures for our politically inclined? And of course, two governors? Because the parallel worlds did not and could not exist, separate was unequal. Only integration, he concluded, would solve the race problem. When that was published in the newspaper, this group of angry white men come together and start planning how to get rid of him. And what they decide is that they will frame him. And so first they framed him for bootlegging. It was a dry state. That only really carried a misdemeanor charge, and that couldn't keep him out of Mississippi Southern College. So they framed him again. This time, they framed him for stealing 7 sacks of chicken feed. And they plant the chicken feed in his farm, and they get a worker at the plant, an African-American, by threat of harm, to say that Kennard asked him to leave the door unlocked so he could steal the chicken feed. And they tried him for this. It is a ridiculous trial. The only evidence they have really is Johnny Lee Roberts, the African-American, that gets on the stand to say that, but he's so upset with his testimony that he cries through the whole thing. And he messes it up. He actually says, he left the door unlocked long after they say they got the chicken feed at Kennard's farm. So it's so obvious that he's innocent. And actually, in 2005, he's been completely exonerated of these charges. And Johnny Lee Roberts admitted that he lied, and that he lied because his family was threatened and he was threatened. But at the time, they convicted him, and for 7 sacks of chicken feed, they sentenced him to 7 years at the Parchment Prison, hard labor. He worked 6 days a week in the fields, and because he was just sort of this extraordinary person, on his day off on Sunday, he taught both white and black inmates how to read, illiterate white and black inmates how to read, wrote letters home for them, and he did his best to persevere in there. And then he got sick. He started throwing up blood, and they wouldn't let him go to the hospital until it got so bad that he literally couldn't move. When they took him to the hospital, the doctors diagnosed him with stomach cancer and removed a tumor. The doctors asked the prison authorities and the governor to release him to the hospital. They would not. They sent him back to Tartu. The cancer came back to the point that he couldn't even walk to the fields anymore. The inmates had to carry him, and he crawled trying to do his work. And finally, when he could barely move, a guard picked him up, threw him in his car, and said, "You better not throw him in my car," and then took him to the doctor and dumped him at the hospital. And this time, the cancer had spread everywhere. Word got out about this, and those NAACP youth activists that were in Forest County were now at Toulouse College, and they launched a free Pinard campaign that became national. People like John Griffin, a white man who had disguised himself as a black man and gone to the South and wrote Black Like Me, he, along with Dick Gregory and Martin Luther King, made this a huge national movement and forced Governor Barnett to release Pinard to the hospital. But by the time Pinard gets to the hospital, he still has hope. John Griffin went to visit him, and he remembered that he found him lying, trying to hide the pain that racked his emaciated body. Pinard told Griffin that his suffering would be worthwhile if it would show this country where racism finally leads. Pinard noted that the racist society had a far worse impact on the guard who had dumped him at the doctor's office than it had on him. This system has turned him into beasts, and it will turn his children into beasts. And Pinard had hopes that he would survive, and he wanted to finish college, become a civil rights lawyer, and continue to fight in the movement. But in 1963 in Mississippi, so many tragedies befell the movement. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Medgar Evers, a great giant of the movement, who was shot dead in his driveway in Jackson. And I cannot a month later, died on Independence Day. So, but that did not deter. That did not deter the Black movement. So I'll do this final reading if I can get to it, my lord. The campaign of the local Black Vanguard and the Snake and Cocoa revolutionaries had created a crisis in the white supremacist state. At the advent of 1964, the conflict burst toward full-blown revolution. Many of the children coming of age at this pivotal moment had witnessed white crackdowns that spawned false imprisonments, and racial murders, but they also witnessed the rising Black protest. They tended to view white supremacists with more anger than fear. Since 12-year-old Larry McGill could remember, he had heard whispers about racial oppression, including the rape of his aunt, and explaining why his cousin was so liked, and the lynching of a cousin in a nearby county because he had looked at a white man. When McGill's mother, Bertie, began taking him to COFA meetings in Laurel and putting him in the circle of the racial struggle, he associated manhood with fighting and justice. In Forest County's Palmer's Crossing, 15-year-old Jamel Stokes linked womanhood with female civil rights leaders like Victoria Gray. It infuriated her that the public library contained an abundance of books that she could never read because it belonged to whites only, and that even poor white trash called her the N-word, as if that elevated their status. Stokes never internalized her oppression. Her community had taught her that she was equal to whites, but she wanted an equal opportunity too. The local struggle had opened a porthole for her into a world beyond Jim Crow, and Stokes determined that she would find her way to the other side. McGill and Stokes and hundreds of other locals became the infantry troops of the revolution on the horizon. And that revolution, I think I have 5 more minutes, so I'll just read this one last piece if you don't mind. That revolution, really, it was so hard to get this revolution going in the Central Penny was because of this constant threat of violence. But the Lynn case gave an opening because he was continuing to defy federal orders, and COFA and state leaders all across the South saw an opportunity here to flock to Forest County and launch a Freedom Day protest. It was supposed to be one day. And African Americans that were residents of the city were going to line up and, hopefully a really long line and try to register to vote. And then everybody else was going, all their allies, or white allies, and the civil rights activists from across the state were going to come and protest. And they hoped that this could, create a great media sensation, and that would put pressure on the federal government to force Lynn to register black voters. So I'll read this last piece. On January 22nd, 1964, gray clouds darkened the morning sky and the rain fell, but nothing could stop the throngs of African Americans as they marched from the Cocoa office on Mobile Street toward downtown Hattiesburg to join the Freedom Day demonstration. Hundreds had summoned the courage to protest Theron Lynn's refusal to register black voters. 15-year-old Jamel Stokes could barely contain her excitement when she turned the corner and saw a group of local blacks led by Cocoa leaders and northern white clergy picketing the Forest County courthouse. Stokes had no fear as she joined the Freedom Day revolt. Black adults like Daisy Griffith Harris, a pretty 33-year-old mother, had lived under Jim Crow long enough to be afraid. But she had quiet strength about her. Beneath her slender frame, delicate face, and ready smile burned a passion that drove her into the rainy streets. As she neared the courthouse and saw a horde of policemen garbed in raincoats and riot helmets marching like a platoon toward the picketers, she froze. She watched the police barricade Main Street and take up positions on both sides of the road. A police vehicle roared to a halt near the protesters. Through a blaring loudspeaker, an officer shouted, "People who wish to register, line up 4 at a time. All those not registering to vote, move off." Instead, 50 more pickets joined. A legion of police lined up beside them, wielding clubs, but they did not arrest anyone. Deputies assumed their position in front of the courthouse doors. The presence of the officers troubled Harris. As a child, she had witnessed lawmen terrorize her neighborhood and seen her great father power before officers. She understood the fragility of black life in Mississippi, and she had 3 young sons and a husband to think about. She huddled with dozens of black adults across the street from the courthouse. Some whites gathered downtown watched the protest unfolding with curiosity, but most of them lowered with rage. From the picket line, Stokes glared back at them and sneered at the Toms as she considered the non-participating blacks. She could not understand how these adults could bend to their oppression. James Farmer, a stalwart figure in the civil rights movement, was more patient than Stokes, and waved over Harris and the others. Inspired by Farmer's courage, Harris crossed the street and into a world of black defiance. Few of the protesters had raincoats or umbrellas, but all day they marched and sang and waved signs reading, "One man, one vote, let my people vote." The national media spread the story across America. Local reporter LHA described Freedom Day as Hattiesburg's first all-out demonstration in the simmering civil rights war. Freedom Day was the first frontal assault on white supremacy in the Central Piney Woods, and it instigated a major turning point in the black struggle. Even though SNCC and Cocoa, staff members, visitors rather than residents, led the charge, organizers recruited an impressive array of locals into the infantry ranks, and they would soon become leaders. Together, they launched a massive and protracted assault on one of the most powerful citadels of white rule, the registered office. They put into practice the nonviolent strategy that had come to define the civil rights movement rolling across the South. To dramatize racial oppression on the national stage, the most powerful civil rights organizations, including CORE, SCLC, SNCC, COCO, and some NAACP branches, were staging a civil rights morality campaign. Through their suffering under racial oppression, they sought to inspire the nation to join the righteous cause for freedom, for brotherhood, for justice, for equality under God. In Forest County, the hundreds of local blacks who joined Freedom Day fought for their political rights, and they fought to force the nation to recognize their humanity. They faced a daunting enemy. Prior to Freedom Day, the Sovereignty Commission, the Mississippi Highway Patrol, Mayor Claude Pittman, and local law enforcement gathered intelligence from informants, briefed Governor Paul B. Johnson Jr., and planned their counter-revolution. They decided to appropriate the movement's nonviolent strategy and turn it against the activists. Lynn would admit prospective voters into the courthouse, but at a sluggish pace. They theorized that the lack of spectacle would bore reporters and that blacks would not wait in the long lines. Officers would arrest activists who violated laws and court officials would convict them, but peacefully and selectively to diminish nationwide media coverage and mitigate federal intervention. Local newspapers would publish the names of Freedom Day protesters so white bosses, landlords, and business owners could fire, evict, and refuse to conduct business with them. The plan was a clever counter-reaction because most Americans had failed to understand the detrimental impact of nonviolent white supremacist resistance. Radical whites resolved to launch a far more brutal strategy. That winter, hundreds of disgruntled white men formed the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan and planned to annihilate the Mississippi movement. The emergence of the terrorist legion imperiled the strategy so meticulously planned by the city fathers, as it forced the federal government to intervene, however reluctantly and gradually. At the advent of 1964, the clashing forces of white supremacy, federalism, and civil rights activism hurled the Central Piney Woods into a state of war for the next decade. That sort of sets up this movement that explodes then in Hattiesburg, and it spreads to Laurel, and Operation Freedom Summer that comes next. And Dave was involved in a lot of that, and that ultimately puts him on a hit list for the Klan. But it was this nonviolent resistance strategy that has helped create sort of this myth of moderation about Forest County that lasted. And then because of, after the attack on Dana, because they did prosecute those Klansmen and got some of them, which was the first time they actually got state convictions for the killing of civil rights activists in Mississippi. So because of that, it kind of led to this reputation that this was a place of moderation. But they never got Sam Bowers. There were 3 hung juries, and so they brought his case back in the 90s. And so the last part of the book says the post-civil rights struggle, how they brought Bowers back to justice, and how they fought the continuing struggles that America still faces today: police brutality, the lack of black representation, and certainly today, blacks in Jones and Forest counties enjoy more power than they ever did in their history. But racial equity continues to elude the Central Piney Woods as it eludes the nation. And so I think, though, that we are in this great cusp of another revolution. We see Black Lives Matter going across the nation. We see a lot of reemergence of gender movements and so forth. And I think we are been on a long, long road, right, to live up to our creed of equality and justice. But I think we're starting a new phase of that, and I look forward to taking part in that, hopefully myself, on this long road to redemption. Thank you.